In our last lesson, we talked about why the drawing is composed the way it is. We talked about values as well and how crucial those are. And what we're going to begin doing now, and we'll begin with level of complexity as far as the elements go. I'm going to use the same techniques I used in the very first video, drawing the cute little robot and then painting him on this tree trunk here on the right side of the painting. Now, you'll notice that the process is going to be really exactly the same for not only this tree trunk, but everything else in the painting, which makes this pretty streamlined. Again, we're going to try to make this as easy for ourselves as possible. We're going to try to make it completely stress-free, and we're going to use a lot of layers until we feel comfortable, and then we're going to collapse those layers. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my geometric lasso tool, and I'm going to begin tracing the shape of this tree. And this is probably the most tedious part of attacking, for me at least, a multiple elements painting like that. And the reason I like the geometric lasso is because I like hard-edged silhouettes, and when I use the lasso tool, especially, well, the geometric, not the freehand, I'm kind of forced to make little compromises, and those compromises usually end in some pretty hard angles, and I welcome that. So again, the cool thing about actually tracing this shape first is that once you finish making the shape, you really don't have to worry about it again. You will trace it and craft it in the way you want it, and then really not have to worry about the blending quality of the edges, the softness or the hardness. The parented layers will take care of that. So right now it's just the tree trunk, not the actual bodies of leaves on top. So in my opinion, this is definitely worth the time you put into it. Silhouette is so important because, you know, it's a part of design, and design is really what gives things their appeal, not so much the rendering. I mean, rendering kind of breathes life into the into the design, but design itself is so important. You know, that's where a lot of your charm is. So with that selected now, I'm going to make a new layer, default it to layer 1, and I'm going to paint bucket tool this selection a really dark kind of muddy green like that. Now I'm going to hide my value drawing and my line art just so I can clearly see what I've got. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that bristle brush that I was using in the very first lesson, and I'm going to set it as my eraser. And in an effort to sort of make the edges of this seem a little more natural, a little more traditional specifically, I'm going to start erasing very gently and not too intrusively into this shape. And I'm not going to do it all over. I'm going to do it just to some of the places where I like to see a little more curve than a hard angle. And this is another thing that's pretty prevalent these days in design, is this principle of straights versus curves. In the old days, a lot of 1940s animation, you would see, well, 40s and the 30s really, you would see a lot of curves. Everybody was just bubbles, basically. Kind of like those rubber hose cartoons from the 30s specifically. People bouncing up and down to music. These days, it's kind of evolved into this more, I don't want to say more dynamic, because those designs were dynamic, but it's definitely a little more intense as far as the silhouettes go. It's a little bolder. You know, they're really statements being made. And I'm a fan of that. I like that kind of design. I think it's great to contrast. You know, I'm all about contrast because I think it creates a lot of interest. So I'm all about contrast when it comes to line quality too. Straight against a curve. Okay, I am happy with that. I think it's just smooth enough and just sharp enough in all the right places. So next I'll make a new layer, and I'm going to parent that layer 2 to layer 1, which is the base shape. And I'm going to pick now what I intend to be my darkest shadow color. Just something near black. Now again, using that same bristle brush, I'm going to begin making a shadow shape. Now if I flip on my drawing and my value again and hide the work I just did, we'll see that the brightest light source is coming in our focal point, right? It's this diagonal stream of light that's coming in from a break, assumingly from a break in the branches up top. But that doesn't mean that everything else isn't receiving some degree of light as well. In fact, in this case, our fill light is going to be coming from above as well. It's going to be the sky. And that means that while the bottom part of this tree is going to receive probably the darkest shadow, the whole tree isn't going to be in black. The top part will receive, in this painting, a cool lighter color, something a little more blue. Now I'm going to save the warm colors for our focal point, and again, that's going to be the main attribute of color contrast between the focal point and the rest of the painting, is that everything else is going to be predominantly cool while I leave the focal point warm. And again, that's in an effort to draw the viewer's eye to that focal point. So I'll get back to making this shadow shape. And again, I am painting in color, but I'm still paying attention to values. I'm always assessing what I'm saying when I put down a new value. So basically what I'm saying here is that whatever is taking this current value that I'm painting, this very dark value, is facing downward. And it really is nice to do a value study before you move on to paint, in my opinion. I don't like doing all the guesswork before I do the painting. But I like doing a good part of it. I think it really helps, especially when you're under the gun at work and you have many of these things to crank out. You want to leave as little guesswork as possible. Now, I still enjoy experimenting during the painting process, the actual execution. But as far as the general lighting scheme goes, that's something that should really be established in a value study, if you don't already have a clear vision of what you're going to do for the lighting setup. Now, most believable, let's say convincing lighting setups are made of three things, at least in the CG world. One is a key light, and generally your key light is your brightest light. The second is a fill light, and that's going to be your... It's going to be less bright than the key light, that's for sure. Maybe a quarter of its intensity, or up to even half maybe, but I think half might be too much. And what the fill light does is, so while the key light is lighting the bright side of the object, the fill light is what helps turn the object. So generally the way something works is you have a key light on one side, the core shadow in the middle, and then your fill light on the other side. It's really good at conveying the illusion of a turning form. Giving these back branches a little bit of love as well. So now with my values, I just kind of established that these branches are not growing out of the front of the tree or the side, they're growing out of the back, more of the back side of the tree. That wasn't really established in the base shape, but value gives us that kind of control. And that's what I mean when I say that, everything you do with value really means something. It's actually saying something. Value is a language in itself, and it should not be taken lightly, because, man, value is it's kind of the deal breaker, honestly. Color is a preference, colors can be preferred, but when it comes to actually rendering things realistically or painting them realistically, you can't have faults in your values, because people know what convincing light looks like. They can't tell you all the elements that make up a convincing lighting scheme, but they know what it looks like, and they'll be able to pick out when something is off. And again, not specifically, but they'll feel it. So do not skip the thought process when it comes to your value studies. Okay, just a little more with this value, and we'll jump to the next one. Now, I don't think I'm going to give this tree more than 4 or 5 values overall. And I want to keep it simple like that because I don't want to really blend too smoothly. If I start to do that, I begin to attain this sort of airbrush look, and that's not what I'm going for. In fact, I try to avoid that at all cost. These days, you know, a very airbrushy look looks very much like it was done in Photoshop. And not that I'm ashamed of working in Photoshop, it's just that you kind of lose the charm of a hand-done painting. You know, in a way, I guess I'm trying to fool somebody into thinking that this could have been done traditionally. Or maybe not fool, just kind of retain some of the same charm that a traditional painting does have. Okie doke. So this is getting to a place where I like it. Gonna just carve out this last piece here. Zoom out. Take a look. I like that. That is good for our darkest dark. So now I'm going to make a new layer. We'll leave the default name of layer 3. I'm going to parent it as well. So now we have 2 stacked parent layers above layer 1, which is the base shape layer. And with that new layer, I'm going to bring that beneath layer 2, which was our darkest shadow. And I'm doing this so I can paint the next lightest value without having to worry about destroying the shape I just made. I don't want to paint over top of it if I have to, unless I have to, which I don't. So this is the next brightest color, and in a traditional painting it would be on top now, but since we're working digitally and we have the power of layers, we can work comfortably beneath it and use the same carving technique that we did for the shadow. And I really need to keep this on its own layer if I'm going to be using this technique, because I need to be able to isolate. Yeah, that's the color I want. I need to be able to isolate this shape so I can hack away at it without hacking away at the work I've already done. Right, so really, again, totally stress-free. I'm not having to worry about anything else other than the one value that I'm putting in now. Okay, I think we're coming to a good place here with this value. So zoom out, take a look at it. Maybe you can go a little bit darker. Yeah, I think that's what we want. So I'm happy with that. Again, a new layer. Put it beneath the 2 we just made. Sample the newest value we just finished doing and brighten it up just a little bit. Maybe to there. And now again, comfortably painting beneath the 2 layers you've already made, not having to worry about destroying the really cool dynamic shapes and the blending aesthetic that we've already established. Okay, looks good. And now our next layer is going to actually be on top, because this is probably going to be the brightest value that this tree trunk is going to have. And there's not going to be a whole lot of contrast between it and the colors beneath it, because that wouldn't be true to the value structure of a tree trunk. You know, wood is not so reflective unless it's lacquered, and you know, there's no tree trunk in the forest, it's lacquered. So I'm going to keep this pretty tamed as far as the scope of value goes. And I think it'll look pretty convincing. Looks good. Maybe put just a little bit of that in the branches now. Not too much, just a hint. Okay, I like that. And now that I'm looking at that darkest color we have on this tree, that darkest shadow layer, I think it's a little too straight in certain areas, especially here. I'm going to give that a little more of a jagged quality. Yeah, I think that looks better. It's looking just a little too perfect as far as that straight line went for the shape. Okie doke. And now, the next layer of detail I'm going to make is just going to be very simple. I'm going to use a standard Photoshop brush way at the top here, one of these. How about this number 9 brush here? And I'm just going to pull some really simple lines across the bottom, or from the bottom to the very top of this tree trunk. And these will be just kind of ridges that go in the tree. And yeah, they're stylized. I'm not doing a photorealistic tree trunk. I'm not really a fan of doing that. I like adding a bit of stylization to everything I do. Because otherwise, I mean, I could just be referencing a photograph, but I don't want to reference a photograph exactly. I want this to be kind of a world of its own. So if I can push shapes and stylize surface details, I will. I'm a really big fan of doing that. Okay. And maybe with the, let's say the brightest color I'm going to use, I'm going to kind of just speckle this trunk on a new parented layer here with a bright color like that. Just dots here and there. I'm trying to give this some very mild textural quality. Okay. I like it. I think this is a successful tree trunk for this lesson. And I'm going to stop here, and in our next video, I'll move on to the main robot, who's going to be a little more complicated, but he's going to use the exact same techniques. He'll just be a little more tedious. You know, he's made of multiple panels, and his surfaces are a little more hard-edged, well, a lot more hard-edged than this tree trunk, which is far more organic. And but this is also the same treatment I'll give every other tree in this painting. So stay tuned for the next lesson, and we'll address that robot.